Every person has a story. Each person we interact with or pass by, those we know, those we don't know, they have a story. And within each life story, there's a collection of days, good days, not so great days, times of smiles and laughter, other times of tears and sorrow, a few days we wish would go on forever, and a whole host of ordinary days. But then there are those days we regret, days where we find ourselves in a mess, sometimes a mess that haunts us, hinders us, redirects us, and we wonder if life will forever be a string of consequences from that mess. I have a story. I have a mess. And while I once thought that nothing good could ever come from my mess, I had an intimate encounter with Jesus, my Messiah. And from the ashes of my mess, God gave me a message, just like a woman who once ventured close to Jesus, sitting at a well. So today we're in John chapter 4, verse 7. It's a story that maybe some of you have heard before, the Samaritan woman at the well. And I have a suspicion that if you've been to any women's conferences or any retreats, you've probably heard a message given on the woman at the well. But before you run away and say, I've heard this one before, been there, done that, have the t-shirt, well, I want to point out something that I think is really cool from this very familiar story, but it's an unfamiliar revelation. So that's where we want to be today. You see, this story starts out in John chapter 4, starting in verse 7, by saying this. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink?" For you see, the Jews did not associate with the Samaritans. The Samaritans were what the Jews considered half-breeds. They were Jews who had married with Gentiles, and they were a disrespected, a lowly people. And so when Jesus, this Jewish man, was talking to the Samaritan woman, that was quite rare. So the Samaritan woman's saying, "Why are you even talking to me?" Jesus answers her in verse 10. "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman says, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, and also his sons and his flocks and his herds?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again." And I imagine he probably pointed at the well. "But whoever drinks the water I give him," and I imagine he points to his heart, "will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become a spring of water welling up to eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming to this well to get my daily water." You see, I think sometimes when we're in kind of a messy life situation, which we'll soon find out this Samaritan woman was absolutely in a messy situation, we want quick answers, we want convenient solutions, and we want that fix that's going to help us live an easier life. So when this woman says, "Give me this water that I won't have to keep lugging this big jar to the well every day," that's what she was looking for, this shallow answer. But Jesus is about to redirect her. He's about to say, "I give answers, but they're not going to be shallow. And I give fixes, but they're not going to be quick." So you see, Jesus says in verse 16, "Go call your husband and come back." You see, Jesus wanted to get straight to the heart of this woman's mess. The woman says in verse 17, "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true, woman." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that this place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." In verse 21, Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." This woman in verse 25 says, "I know that Messiah, that Christ is coming, and when he comes, he's going to explain everything to us." Again, this woman is saying, I want convenient, quick answers. I want convenient, quick solutions. I want to not have to come to this well every day with my water jug, and I want this Messiah because he's going to answer these questions that have haunted me my whole life. And once again, Jesus says, oh no, we're going to dig a little deeper today. We're not going to get quick, easy solutions and simple answers. We're about to go deep. Verse 26, Jesus declares, I who speak to you am he.
Well, I grew up, my parents were both migrant workers. It was just really hard in school to fit in. Low self-esteem. I didn't get a lot of encouragement from my family. Didn't get a lot of affection from my dad. My mom, she became very abusive. I basically got a full-time job and moved out of the house. So I worked Monday through Friday, and on the weekends just partied. Got into the wrong crowd. I met my husband, and I didn't realize it then that he had a drinking problem. It was mainly he liked to party and I liked to party, and so that's what we did, and that's really what brought us together. We were married maybe a few months when I discovered that I was pregnant with my first child, and so I decided that it was time to back off some of the partying. But when I quit drinking and he continued the drinking, that's when I started seeing that something just wasn't right. And I started at that time attending church with my sister-in-law and learning about Jesus and who he really was. It was during this time that I committed my life to the Lord, and I decided to just change my life and my thinking, and I just felt basically like a new person. When I was going crazy trying to fix everybody and fix everything, it just didn't work. It was just too much. But when I put it down and just laid it all on the cross, he took care of it all. He worked behind the scenes when I didn't think there was any hope, but I just trusted. He healed my husband. He healed my marriage. It took a while. It took a lot of years of Christian counseling, of trust, to just set aside my own fears and to really trust God. And when I did, he took care of it all and restored what needed to be restored.
And at that point, the woman at the well has a divine encounter with Jesus, and she knows it's Jesus. Verse 28, then leaving her water jar, leaving behind her desire for quick fixes and easy answers, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Christ? And they came out of the town and made their way toward him. You see, this woman who had a mess had such a divine encounter with the Messiah. And in that moment where she realized this is the Messiah, he touched her mess and turned it into a message. And she didn't just sit back and say, give me those quick fixes and easy answers anymore. When she was touched by the Messiah, when her mess was touched by that Messiah and turned into a message, she became faithful with that message. And she left where she was. She left her desires for quick fixes and easy answers, and she headed back, for there were people who needed to know what she had found. What about you? What about your life? Have you found in certain parts of your life that you have a mess that you've just never quite been able to get over? Maybe a mess that's hindered you, held you back. made you feel incapable or inadequate? I know what that feels like because I lived with a mess for a long time. It started when I was about 8 years old, when I tried so desperately to get my daddy to say that he loved me. I'd put on a pretty dress and gone and stood beside his chair, and he ignored me. As a matter of fact, he ignored me most of my life, and if he ever did speak to me, he would often say, "You know, Lisa, I never wanted children, especially not a girl." So I took that hurt and that shame and I pushed it deep down in my heart. And it became a mess that defined me, a mess that hindered me, a mess that redirected me, a mess that ruined a lot of relationships. Yeah, I definitely wanted quick, easy answers. I wanted quick solutions in my life. But then I had a divine encounter with the Messiah who touched my mess and revealed to me that I didn't have to be the child of a broken parent the rest of my life. I could be the child of God. And that gave me a message to take to all these other women who in their life had been hurt, rejected, abandoned, told that they were unloved. You know, isn't it interesting that the first 4 letters of Messiah is the word mess? It's almost as if Jesus himself, Jesus the Messiah, is the perfect fit for our mess. That it was always supposed to be this way, that always God knew that we would have a mess because we live in a broken world, and that the Messiah would come and touch our mess, and out of that would give us a message. And that's what he did with the Samaritan woman. It picks back up. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him. In other words, once they met the reality of Jesus, of what this Messiah had done in this woman's life, once they saw that this Messiah could touch a mess and give her such rich hope, a message of forgiveness and redemption, she kept screaming, "He told me everything I ever did." And no longer was she embarrassed by it, for she had been healed, she had been touched, she had been forgiven. Verse 40, so when the Samaritans came to him, when they came to Jesus, they urged him to stay with him, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman in verse 42, "We no longer believe just because of what you have said. Now we have heard for ourselves." In other words, now we see our mess can be touched by the Messiah, and we can have a message of hope and redemption. I like this story, and I like the way it ties into the story in Luke chapter 17. So that's where we'll wrap up today. In Luke 17, starting in verse 11, it tells the story of 10 men who had leprosy. In other words, 10 men who had a pretty significant mess, because you see, in that day, when you had leprosy, you were ostracized. You were taken out of your community, away from the people you knew and loved and did life with, and you were placed in a leper colony outside of the city. Yes, indeed, these 10 men, they had a big mess. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. Verse 12, and as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Messiah, come touch our mess." Verse 14, and when Jesus saw them, he said, "Oh, go show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, only one, verse 15 says, one out of the 10, when he saw he was healed, he came back. You see, he received from the Messiah a touch upon his mess, and he came back because he recognized that he had a message. He came back praising God in a loud voice. He wasn't asking for quick solutions and easy answers. He just simply came back. And he threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. Strange, don't you think? I don't think that he threw himself at Jesus' feet and said, "Thank you for the leprosy." I think he threw himself at Jesus' feet and said, "Jesus, whatever it took for me to get to this sweet place with you, whatever it took for me to realize that out of my mess the Messiah could touch me and give me a message, that I thank you for. Whatever it took, it was worth it." And then Jesus says, Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he looked down, he tenderly bent down to the only one out of 10 that came back. And he said, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." Isn't it interesting that when the Messiah touches our mess and he gives us a message, you see, Jesus says something so crucial here. This one who came back, who was willing to let his mess be touched by the Messiah and turned into a message of hope that he could then give to others. Only this one was not just cleansed, he was healed, but not just healed, he was completely made well, restored, as if he'd never had leprosy in the first place. And that's the miracle of letting your mess be touched by the Messiah and turned into a message. You know, as I've taken my mess, which the Messiah touched and turned into a message, as I take it out and give it to other women, each time I share that story and I see God take what Satan meant for such evil in my life and use it for such good, I am not only cleansed, not only healed, I'm made completely well, as if I'd never even had that mess in the first place. Where will you be in this story? Will you be the one? Will you allow the Messiah to touch your mess and give you a message and take it and give this world hope? I pray that you will.